Picture the most crowded building in Europe, not a city, one building. Now fill it with 10,000 people who all believe they matter, stack them from gilded staterooms down to attic closets barely wider than a coffin, and give every single one of them somewhere urgent to be. Add courtiers relieving themselves in the stairwells because the nearest privy is a quarter-mile of corridors away. Add a nobleman who would fight a duel over the right to hand a man his shirt. Add the smell of orange blossom and melting wax laid over the smell of 3,000 unwashed bodies, and mirrors, more mirror glass in one gallery than existed in most kingdoms, reflecting all of it back at itself twice. That's Versailles in the 1680s, the most public place on earth, built around the most guarded secrets in Europe. A palace where a king dressed and undressed in front of 100 witnesses every single day, and where the things that actually mattered, a midnight wedding, a hole burned into a royal mouth, a surgeon practicing in secret on the bodies of the poor, happened behind one particular door, in front of almost no one. We're going back there tonight. Not to the gardens, not to the fountains, not to the throne. We're going inside the king's beer chamber on the wrong side of the velvet rope, with the men whose entire employment was to see everything and to say nothing. One place, one pair of borrowed eyes, 4 years. Everything the chamber saw, smelled, carried, burned, and kept. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I've stopped trying to guess whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who like drifting off to the details of royal enemas and the private arithmetic of a king's ruined teeth. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. One thing first, because this story trades in secrets, and a story about secrets has to be honest about what it knows. Everything sealed inside this episode is documented. The rooms are real. The dates are real. The men with famous names, Bontemps, Felix, Daquin, the king himself, are real. And everything they do here stands in registers, in memoirs, in a medical journal you can still read today. But the boy whose hands I'm about to give you is not one man. The wage books of the king's chamber list its junior servants by function and pay, and history did not bother to keep their faces, so the boy is stitched together from all of them, a composite borrowed eyes, and nothing more. These secrets are real. The witness is alone. And whenever this story reaches the edge of what the record actually says, I'll tell you so, plainly. That's the deal. Now. The smell reaches you before anything else has properly begun. Hot linen, that particular toasted sweetness that rises off good cloth held close to flame. Close, but not too close, with beeswax underneath it from the candles at your elbow and wood smoke, and beneath all of it the cold stone breath of a palace at 5:45 on a November morning, a smell like the inside of a well. You are holding the King of France's shirt to a fire. Your arms are straight out in front of you, the shirt draped across both forearms like something wounded, turned every few seconds so the warmth soaks the linen evenly, and no single spot scorches. Your shoulders burn. They started burning 10 minutes ago. You do not lower your arms, because the last boy who let a king's shirt touch the hearthstone is remembered in this room the way other places remember plagues. The fire snaps. Somewhere behind the panelling, water is moving through pipes, ticking as it goes. And 4 feet to your left, standing at a small table with a single candle, a heavy-set man of 56 in plain dark wool is reading a piece of paper by holding it almost against his nose. The paper is the night list. Every person who entered or left the king's apartment between the coucher last night and this moment is on it. Every doctor, every courier, every servant, every name and every hour. The man reading it wrote most of it himself, in the dark, from a folding bed placed so that nobody could reach the king's bed without stepping past his own. His name is Alexandre Bontemps, first valet de chambre of the king, and though the princes of the blood outrank him, though dukes would not let him sit in their presence, there is a sentence whispered in every corridor of this palace, and it happens to be true. No man in France is trusted the way this man is trusted. When he finishes reading, he does not file the paper, he does not pocket it. He steps past you, leans down, and feeds it to the fire you're warming the shirt at. The paper curls, flares, and is gone. The night's history rises past the king's shirt as a thread of smoke. He does this every morning. You've watched him do it every morning for 4 months. Bontemps writes nothing he cannot burn. Turn it, he says, without looking at you. You turn the shirt. Your forearms scream quietly. You say nothing, because you are learning the first and only real rule of this room. The rule that everything else in this story hangs from. The rule he gave you on your first morning, with his face a hand's width from yours. What the chamber sees, the chamber keeps. Welcome to Versailles. It is late November, 1682. The court of France has been officially installed in this palace for 6 months, since the 6th of May, when the king moved his government into a building that was still in places a construction site, because he had decided that France would now be run from here, and buildings do not argue with him. Nobody argues with him. He is 44 years old, he has reigned since he was 4, he has ruled alone for 21 years, and he has spent those years turning himself into something no king had quite managed before. A man whose entire life, waking to sleeping, is a public ceremony performed on schedule, like a mass, like the sun he took for his emblem. That's the version everyone sees. You're about to spend 4 years learning the other one. Because here is the thing nobody outside this apartment understands. The thing that took you your first month to believe. The most watched man in Europe, watched at his rising, watched at his meals, watched at his card table, watched at his prayers, is also, for a few hours in every 24, a private body in a warm room. A body with a bad stomach and worse teeth. A body that sweats through its linen and must be rubbed down and rewrapped. A body that will, in the years you're about to live through, be secretly married, secretly maimed, and secretly cut open at dawn while 10,000 people sleep on the other side of the wall, not knowing. And the only people who will ever see that body are the ones in this room. The valets, the garçons, the men history calls, when it bothers to call them anything, the domestiques. You. This shirt is warm now, warm as skin, which is the point. A king should never feel the cold of his own linen. You lift it from your arms, fold it over the warming frame the way you were taught, collar away from the fire, and you allow yourself for 3 seconds the small heresy of thinking about who you are, because in an hour it will not matter to anyone. Your name is Etienne. You're 15 years old. You're the second son of a clockmaker in Blois, a man who spent 30 years bent over escapements and gear trains, and who did, once, a discreet and complicated favour involving a repaired watch and a delicate letter hidden inside its case. A favour for a household that owed a favour to a household that owed Monsieur Bontemps. That is how places in the king's chamber are filled, not by talent, by chains of debt and discretion running back years, because the one quality this room requires cannot be tested in an interview. They needed to know what your family does with secrets. Your family keeps them inside clocks. So in July you came up the road from Blois with a spare shirt, a good pair of shoes, and your father's last words to you. delivered not as tenderness, but as professional instruction. A clock that chimes what it should not is broken, and broken clocks are sold for parts. You're paid 300 livres a year. A single one of the embroidered coats you will hand to sleepy dukes in this bedchamber costs more than you will earn before you are 25. You sleep in a soupente, a boarded loft above a back corridor, 5 feet at its highest point, smelling of tallow and mice. You own almost nothing, but you stand every morning 8 feet from the King of France. There are marshals who cannot say that. There are archbishops who cannot say that. Near enough, silent enough, warm enough. That is the whole of your employment, and it is about to make you one of the best informed and least important people in the world. The second sound of the morning is water. Colin comes sideways through the service door with 2 copper cans of it, hot from the kitchen's first boil, and sets them down without letting the handles ring against the rims, because he has been doing this for 3 years, and his hands have learned the arithmetic of silence. Colin is 19, Norman, built like a fence post, with ears that stick out under his cap and the permanent half-smile of a boy who knows the price of everything in this palace, down to the last denier. He is the senior garçon of your shift, which means he owns the knowledge and you own the errands. And the first thing he ever taught you 4 months ago was not how to fold linen or carry a candle. It was how to stand, weight on both feet, hands visible, eyes at the level of other men's collars, never their faces, never the floor. Low enough to be nothing, high enough to see everything. You have been standing that way for 4 months and your back has stopped arguing about it. Shirt done. Colin's whisperers pitched to die within 3 feet. You tilt your head at the warming frame. He checks it anyway, touches the collar with the back of one finger, the way your father used to touch a mainspring, and gives you the small nod that is the only wage of your morning so far. Look at the room while there is still time to look, because in 2 hours you will not be permitted to see it. The king's bedchamber is not large by the standards of what surrounds it. Firelight and 1 branch of candles. Crimson winter hangings stitched with so much gold thread that the walls seem to be smouldering. A ceiling too dark to read at this hour. And running across the width of the room, dividing it the way an altar rail divides a church, a low gilded balustrade. On the far side of that rail stands the bed, raised on its shallow platform, curtains drawn, breathing. On your side of the rail is everything else in the world. Remember the rail. Every person you will ever watch enter this room will be measured against it. Who may approach it, who may lean upon it, who may pass it. That is the entire Constitution of France written in a fence. For now the curtains stay shut, and the room belongs to the servants, the only hours of the day it ever will. The fire is fed, the floor is swept on knees, by candlelight, a wet cloth ahead of the broom so the dust cannot rise and set the king coughing. The night candles are collected, and here Colin performs the first small ceremony of your education, the one he performs every morning with the gravity of a sacristan. The stubs go into the leather pouch at his belt. Candle ends are a perquisite of the chamber. The king's candles are beeswax, church grade, and they are never, never lit twice in his presence. A candle burned for one evening and snuffed is finished, as far as Versailles is concerned, and what is finished falls to the servants, and what falls to the servants is sold, and the wax dealers of the town pay real silver for it. Colin calls the pouch his second salary. You have started your own hoard in a box under your mattress in the soupente, stubs the length of a thumb, smelling of honey and smoke. Remember those too. Sleep on them, but remember them. At 7:30, the machine engages its first gear. You hear it before you see it, the whole palace leaning toward this one room. Doors far away, opening in sequence like locks on a canal. Footsteps gathering in the guard room, in the antechamber, voices at a level men believe is quiet. Versailles wakes facing the king's bed the way a field of sunflowers wakes facing east, and you, standing against the wall with your hands folded, are inside the thing they are all turned toward. At 8, Bontemps opens the door to the physicians. Daquin comes first physician to the king, silk under his black gown, perfumed past the point of argument, a man whose fortune hangs on the contents of another man's body, and who therefore reads that body the way bankers read ledgers. Behind him the first surgeon, Felix, and mark this man. Mark him now, because this story has been walking toward him since the first sentence. Charles Francois Felix, surgeon to the king as his father was before him, quiet where Daquin glitters, hands pale, kept soft and steadier than any hands you have ever seen, steadier than your father's, and your father could set a hair-fine escapement trembling into perfect time. Felix says perhaps 6 words on an ordinary morning. He is the only man who enters this room whose entire employment is waiting for something to go wrong. They confer with Bontemps in the window bay, how the night passed in murmurs over the folding bed that has already been cleared away as if the first valet's sleep were itself a secret. Then Bontemps crosses the rail alone, leans to the curtains and speaks the sentence that officially begins the day of France. Sire, voilà l'heure. Sire, it is time. What happens next, no engraving will ever show you. The curtains do not open. A hand comes through them, comes out of the warmth like a swimmer's hand out of water, and Bontemps places into it the small mourning wig, the short one, the levee wig. The hand withdraws, a pause, the length of an hour. Only then are the curtains drawn, and the King of France is sitting up in the centre of the great bed, wigged and therefore visible. Understand what you are being shown. If you have ever heard the stories of this palace's filthier habits, the wig trade, the 40 perruquiers, the fortunes in other people's hair riding on gentlemen's heads, then you already know what the wig is worth in leaves. What the chamber knows is what it is worth in fear. No one sees the king's bare scalp. Not the princes, not the doctors, not the mistresses, not, so far as you can tell, God during Mass. Perhaps 5 men in the world hold the memory of the king's naked head, and every one of them answers to Bontemps, and the wig goes through the curtain before the curtain opens, every single morning, so that the number can stay 5. This is the first state secret you are ever taught, and it is a hairline. But he laughs. You learn very quickly here that the small secrets are rehearsals for the great ones, and that a room which cannot keep a scalp could never be trusted to keep what this room will be asked to keep. The king sweats in the night, heavily. The linen comes off him soaked on winter mornings, and it is Daquin's first business to see him rubbed down and changed, and it is your business, invisible at the wall, to have the fresh shirt warm, and to receive the wet one into a basket you will carry away at the level of your chest like something ceremonial, because it is. Everything that touches him is ceremonial. The rub-down is brisk and human. Spirits and orange flower water, the king's arms lifted, his back scrubbed pink, an ordinary heavy male body of 44 being serviced. And it takes place in front of perhaps a dozen people, and it is nothing, nothing at all, compared to what is about to happen. because at 8:30 the doors are opened in earnest and the levers of the lever begin. They come in waves in strict order, and the order is the point. First, the entrée familière, the sons and grandsons of France, princes of the blood, the first physician, the first surgeon, those who may see the king still, so to speak, damp. Then the grand entrée, the great officers, the grand chamberlain, the master of the wardrobe. Then the first entrée, gentlemen lesser but still gilded. Then the entrée of the chamber. Then, wave on wave, everything ambitious in France that has begged, bought or inherited the right to stand in this room and watch a man put on his clothes. And when I say watch a man put on his clothes, I need you to understand what that means here. In this palace, in 1682, this is not a king getting dressed with servants about. This is a liturgy with 100 communicants, each of whom has fought for his place in it the way soldiers fight for ground. This shirt, your shirt, the one whose warmth still lives in your forearms, does not go from the frame to the king. It goes up, you hand it to the officer of the wardrobe. The officer presents it to the Grand Chamberlain, or to whichever prince outranks him this morning, because the right to hand the King of France his shirt is a possession, arguably the possession, and men have gone to their graves sour over its loss. The shirt ascends through 4 pairs of hands, gaining glory at each transfer like a relic passed up a cathedral, and the last pair of hands, ducal at minimum, royal if the day is lucky, floats it over the king's head while 100 courtiers watch a man's damp hair vanish into warm linen and count themselves blessed among Frenchmen. Your part in its warmth is already forgotten. That is correct. That is the design. The machine exists so that glory flows toward the bed, and invisibility flows toward the walls, and you are the wall. They watch him shave every other day, chin back, throat bare. 100 men watching a razor lie against the artery of the French state, wielded by a barber who is naturally one of Bontemps' men. They watch him step into his breeches. They watch 2 pages warm his day shirt a final time, your work redone grandly as theatre. They watch him buckle his own shoes because he insists on that. One small island of self-service in an ocean of hands. They watch him pray, kneeling at the head of the bed, the whole room dropping with him, silk knees on parquet, an army of the ambitious murmuring toward God with one eye open. And through all of it, men are working the room. That is what the lever is actually for, and it takes you a month to see it. The dressing is scenery. The business is proximity. A marshal has manoeuvred 3 feet closer to the bed than his enemy the Duke. A bishop catches the king's eye for 1/2 second and will live on it for a week. Requests are not spoken here. That would be gross. They are worn, in the cut of a coat, in the depth of a reverence, in the choreography of simply being seen, at the right hour in the right room, morning after morning for years. You watch dukes jostle like fishwives with their faces perfectly still. Nobody argues with him. They arrange themselves in front of him, and the arrangement is the argument. Some mornings, and this you would not believe if you had not stood against the wall for it, the most sought-after audience of all happens afterward, behind the rail, at the chaise percée, the pierced chair, a velvet-covered box with a hole in it, and the king seated upon it doing what every man born does, while 2 or 3 gentlemen, holders of a specific privilege, the brevet d'affaires, purchased for sums that would buy your father's whole street in Blois, stand near him and converse about the affairs of Europe. Men have paid fortunes for the right to attend the king at his stool, and they count the money well spent because there are so few of them, and the room is so quiet, and the king, at that particular sitting, cannot walk away. The first time you saw it, you thought you had misunderstood. You had not. In Versailles, there is no privacy at the top. There is only expensiveness of access. The most private act of the king's body is simply the smallest room of his publicity, with the highest rent. By 9:15 it is done. The king goes out through the doors to mass with the whole hive swarming after him down the hall of mirrors. 240 feet of arcaded glass, 17 windows answering 17 mirrored arches, more than 350 plates of mirror glass throwing the procession back at itself, so that one king walking becomes 200 kings walking, which is the entire idea of this building expressed in a single corridor. The roar of it recedes like weather. The doors are closed, and the room exhales. That is the moment you love, though you would confess it to no one. The chamber with the machine gone out of it. Fire ticking. Dust settling in long blades of window light. The bed enormous and abruptly ordinary. A piece of furniture where a heavy man sweated through his linen. Colin already stripping the sheets. Bontemps by the window, a list in his hand, tomorrow already forming in the set of his jaw. To Versailles, then. That is what you have learned by your 4th month, and it is the fact this whole story hangs on, so take it with you into sleep. There is the Versailles of the lever, the 100 witnesses, the ascending shirt, the mirrors multiplying majesty down a corridor built for exactly that purpose. That Versailles exists so that everyone may see the king, always, and so that everyone may believe there is nothing about him left unseen. And there is the other Versailles, which begins at the gilded rail and ends behind the little door in the panelling that the crowd never notices, the door to the back rooms and the narrow stairs, the Versailles of perhaps a dozen people, where the body is a body, where the wig comes off, where the lists are burned. The public one exists to hide the private one in plain sight. A man watched by 100 people a day is assumed to have no secrets. That assumption is the thickest wall in this palace, thicker than anything the masons built. You're on the wrong side of it, the inside. What the chamber sees, the chamber keeps. Get used to the weight. The days belong to the machine. The nights are where your real employment lives, and the nights are what this story is actually about, so come and work one. It begins, like everything here, with food eaten in public. At 10 in the evening the king soups au grand couvert, at the great cover, which means he sits at a table, mostly alone or with the family of France, and eats an enormous meal while a standing crowd watches him do it, watches him eat, files past some nights, as if the table were a shrine on a pilgrim road. There are courtiers who attend the king's supper for years and are never once spoken to, and count the time well spent. He eats prodigiously. This is not flattery. The man eats like a siege army. 4 plates of different soups on a strong night. A whole pheasant, ham, mutton with garlic, salad, pastry, fruit, hard-boiled eggs. And the crowd drinks the sight of that appetite the way villages drink the sight of a good harvest. 'Cause a king who eats like that cannot be dying, and a king who cannot be dying is the only public safety anyone in this century has ever known. Remember the supper. Remember that his eating is a performance of health with an audience of hundreds, and that every performance is a hostage to the body that gives it. The body will call in that debt before this story is done. Then the cowsher, the lever run backward, the crowd again, the great chamber again, the undressing conducted in reverse order of glory, and one small ceremony that tells you everything about this place, so watch it closely. On a stand by the bed there burns a two-branched candlestick, the bougeoir. When the moment comes, the king looks out over the assembled lords of France and speaks a name. That is all. The named man steps forward, and a valet, some nights it is you, places the candlestick into his hands, and he holds it, simply holds it, while the king is undressed. That is the whole honour. It cost the king nothing. It is worth more than a regiment. Men who command fortresses go home sick with envy of the man who held the candle, and the man who held the candle writes to his province that night so the news arrives before he does. You've stood 8 feet away with the wax warming your fingers, waiting to pass a candlestick to a duke, and understood in the fullest way the exchange rate of this palace. Light held near the king is currency. The stubs of it sold by weight in town are yours. Then the room empties one wave at a time, glory leaving in the order it came until the doors close on the last of them, and there is the petit coucher for the few, and then not even that. The candles are put out except one. And now count who is left, because this is the census that matters, the one no herald ever cries. The King of France, in a nightshirt and a nightcap, unwigged, small in the enormous bed. Bontemps on the folding cot at the foot of it, placed square across the approach like a drawbridge raised, a garçon within a bell's reach, and no one else in the world. 10,000 people under this roof, and at midnight the most powerful man alive is guarded by a 56-year-old valet on a camp bed, and a boy from Blois dozing in a loft that smells of tallow and mice. That arithmetic kept you awake. Your first months. It has stopped keeping you awake. That frightens you a little. On the nights you still notice it. By the bed, on a small table, the en cas de nuit is set out, the just in case of the night. Every night the same and every night fresh. 3 small loaves, 2 bottles, 1 of wine and 1 of water, cold meat under a white cloth, laid there against the chance that the King of France should wake hungry in the dark. Most mornings it stands untouched, and by ancient, comfortable, unwritten law, what the king does not eat by dawn belongs to the chamber. You have breakfasted on the king's untouched midnight bread more mornings than you could count, torn it standing up in the service corridor with the crumbs still cool and dense as cake, and Collins swears no baker in France bakes for anyone the way the pantry bakes for a man who is asleep. Remember the tray. Of everything in this room, remember the tray, the little white altar of just in case. There will come a morning when the sight of it standing untouched will mean something you cannot yet imagine. Your post is the soupente, the boarded loft over the back corridor, up a ladder polished by decades of garçons' hands. 5 feet at the ridge, you have learned to dress kneeling, a straw mattress, your box of candle stubs, your spare shirt on a nail, and, bolted to the joist by your head, a small dull bell on a wire that runs down through the wall and ends at a pull by the first valet's cot. When the bell moves, you are already moving. You sleep the way sailors sleep, with one ear posted as sentry, and the bell rings. Oh, it rings. Not often for the king, for the world. Because here is what nobody in the glittering rooms understands about the night side of this palace. The kingdom does not close. Dispatches do not hold office hours. Couriers come off the Paris road at 2 in the morning with their horses blown and their boots frozen to the stirrups, carrying word from armies, from ambassadors, from the police of Paris, and every one of those men, at the end of his ride, arrives not at a ministry but at a door, a small door, a back stair, and at the top of it, in a dressing gown with a single candle, Alexandre Bontemps. You have gone down the narrow stair at 3 in the morning to unbar that door more times than you can number. You've stood holding the candle while a mud-plastered rider fumbles a packet out of oiled cloth, and you have watched Bontemps read in the cold with his face producing nothing, absolutely nothing, the way a locked door produces nothing. Some packets he holds till morning. Some go into the fire unread by anyone else, ever. And twice, 3 times maybe in your first winter, he has crossed the dark chamber, leaned past the drawn curtains, and murmured the king awake, and you have heard, from your place by the door, the low grain of the 2 oldest voices in your life conferring in the dark, the king and the king's shadow. Bontemps is a dozen years older than his master. He has served him since before the king could rule. When the 2 of them speak at 3 in the morning, you are not hearing a king commander servant. You are hearing something for which the ceremonies of this palace have no name at all, and it is the only thing here that has ever reminded you of home. It was on one of those nights that Bontemps learned what you are. A courier's watch, a good verge watch, Blois work, you knew the style of the case before he was through the door, had stopped, and the man was in distress over it beyond all sense, until you understood, and then made a point of not understanding, that the case was the point and not the hours, that a watch case is a small, dry strong-box that travels innocently on a chain. Bontemps saw you see it. He said nothing that night. But the next evening in the service room he set an old watch of his own on the table between you, dead these 2 years, and folded his arms. You opened it with a knife tip warmed in the candle, dust in the train, a hair-spring set awry, 20 minutes' work with tools improvised from a seamstress's kit, your father's motions coming up through your hands like water finding an old channel. When it ticked, Bontemps listened to it for a long moment the way other men listen to news. Since that night the clocks of the private rooms are yours to wind, and you have understood that you are not given a chore. You are given a test that never ends. A boy who can open a watch case without leaving a mark on it is a boy who could read what a watch case carries. Bontemps handed you that abilitous temptation on a ring of little keys, and he watches, without watching, what you do with it. You wind. You true the hands against the equation table. You close the cases. You read nothing. A clock that chimes what it should not is broken, and broken clocks are sold for parts. And some nights, when the palace is at its stillest and you are coming back along the service corridor with the winding keys cold in your fist, you pass the sealed rooms of the night side and feel, the way you feel weather, the other thing your master carries. Because the first valet of the chamber is not only the first valet of the chamber, he is governor of this whole town of a palace, Versailles, and Mali under his ring, quartermaster of its secrets, paymaster of errands that appear in no ledger, pensions that arrive with no signature, certain visitors after dark who are met at certain gates and conducted by certain stairs, and about whom the rule is not that you must not speak. Speech was never a possibility, but that you must contrive not to have seen them, even inside your own head. Colin puts it this way, in the loft, in a whisper, with his half-smile gone. The king has ministers for everything he does as France. For what he does as a man, he has one minister. You sleep above that ministry. Mind where you step. And once in that first winter, only once, the ministry showed you its flaw. Understand what had happened in Paris in the years just before you came, because all France whispered it and nobody said it. For 3 years a special court sat in the arsenal, the chambre ardente, the burning chamber, judges by torchlight examining a horror that had opened under polite society like a cellar under a ballroom floor. Poisoners, fortune-tellers, sellers of inheritance powders and black masses, and a police lieutenant, La Reynie, pulling on threads that kept coming up silk. Great names, court names, names, the whisper ran, that went higher than names are supposed to go. And then in 1682, this very year, months before this November morning, the court was shut, quietly. The trials ended, certain prisoners vanished into fortresses under lifelong orders of silence, and the most dangerous of the testimony, the pages bearing the names nearest the throne, were not read into any record. That much is documented, and I will not step 1 inch past what is. The record itself says that a portion of the record was sealed, set apart by the king's own order, locked away from courts and clerks and history. What was in those pages no storyteller honestly knows, and I will not pretend to. We know that the king kept them. We know, because the policeman's own private notes outlived everything, that near the end of his life the king would have the sealed papers brought to him and burned. But that is a fire 27 years downstream of tonight, and we will not reach it for a long while yet. What you know in the winter of 1682 is only this. That one night a plain-locked chest came up the back stair with an escort that did not wear livery, and Bontemps had the corridor cleared. You were sent to the far end with a candle and an instruction to trim it slowly, and for a quarter of an hour there were sounds of weight being moved somewhere behind the panelling in one of the rooms to which you have never seen a key. You never saw the chest again. No one ever mentioned a chest. There was never a chest. And Colin, who has 3 years on you, and who marked how carefully you were not looking, gave you that night the only advice of his you have never once disobeyed. Some boxes, he breathed, with his mouth barely moving, hold candle ends. Some hold the reasons kings stop sleeping. Learn the difference by weight, and never learn it any other way. You carry a great many things up and down the dark stairs of this palace in your 4 years. You weigh every one of them in your hands, without meaning to, the way a clockmaker's son weighs everything, and you are careful, always, to keep the difference to yourself. What the chamber sees, the chamber keeps. What the chamber only suspects, the chamber buries. Winter loosens. The year 1683 comes up the avenues with the scaffolding, because the palace, you should understand, is never finished. You have never known it finished. The north wing climbs inside its cage of poles. The fountains are forever being unearthed and reburied, and 36,000 men are said to labour on the works of Versailles and its waters in these years, so that the grandest address in Europe wakes every day to the sound of its own construction, hammers at the edge of hearing all through the lever like rain on a distant roof. You turn 16 in the spring and no one marks it, including, very nearly, you. Your arms have stopped aching at the warming frame. That particular burn has been paid down into muscle. You know the private rooms in the dark now, know which floorboard announces you and which forgives you, know the 11 clocks on your ring of keys by voice, the way a herdsman knows cattle, near enough, silent enough, warm enough. Warm. The seasons move the machine outdoors and back, the court to Saint-Cloud, to Fontainebleau, the enormous portable liturgy of the King's Day folding itself into wagons, chamber, rail, bed and all, and everywhere it goes, the little white tray of the encasse is set out at night, and the night list is written, and at dawn the night list is burned, and into this year, quietly, walks the woman. She's been at court a long while, in the manner of furniture. which is to say seen daily and considered never. Françoise d'Aubigné, widow of the poet Scarron, governess once to the king's children by Madame de Montespan, the ones born on the wrong side of everything and legitimated after. A woman past 45, born in a prison yard at Niort, where her father was held for debt, raised poor to the very edge of hunger, and now, by the strange hydraulics of this court, Marquise de Maintenon, with an apartment on the great staircase and a place in the Dauphine's household, black gown or brown like strong coffee, superb dark eyes that take in a room in one unhurried pass and give back nothing, an economy of glance you've seen in exactly one other person, and he sleeps on a camp bed at the foot of the king's. No paint on her face in a palace enamelled with it, no noise in her dress. The great ladies read her plainness as defeat. You read it the way you read Bontemps' plain dark wool, because it is the same garment, the uniform of those who have decided to be underestimated. What you know from the chamber is the schedule. The king goes to her. Most days now, in the late afternoon, up the marble stair to the apartment across from the guardroom, and sits with her. Sits hours, while the court downstairs performs its brilliance without him. Sometimes a minister is sent for, and the work of France is done at her fireside, papers on his knee, and she at her needlework in the good light, saying little, and that little, you are given to understand, weighed like coin. The court sees an aging governess with clever conversation, and laughs carefully. Montespan, still lodged in glory, still magnificent, a beauty the age itself is named for in certain memoirs, grows loud on the subject, and her loudness is itself news, because the loudness of a woman losing is a sound this palace knows the way physicians know a cough. The chamber does not laugh. The chambers watch the King of France, who is watched at his rising and his meals and his prayers by hundreds, choose to spend the unwatched hours of his day, every day, in one particular room, in one particular company, and the chamber knows what the court has forgotten. You learn what a man loves not by watching what he displays, but by watching where he goes when the display is done. Mark the hours is all Bontemps says of it. Once, when the king is laid down and supper must be held, not a complaint, a bearing taken. You mark the hours lengthen all through the spring. Then, in 1 week of high summer, God takes hold of the story with both hands. The court is at Versailles, the last days of July, heat standing in the state-rooms like a tenant, the gardens ticking and shimmering, the smell of box hedge and warm gravel coming in at every open casement. The Queen, Marie-Thérèse, that small, kind, devout, homesick Spanish woman who has been Queen of France for 23 years, and has said, they tell it, that in all of them she has had scarcely a day's happiness she could call her own, takes to her bed with an abscess beneath her left arm, a small thing. The physicians attend her, which is to say they bleed her, and purge her, and drive the ill humour. You will hear the chamber's opinion of this in the physicians' own faces before the week is out, inward instead of out. The abscess turns, the arm swells, the fever climbs like the July heat day over day. And you learn something in that week about the house you serve, how sound behaves in a palace when it is frightened. The music stops first, then the laughter thins out of the galleries, then the very footsteps change, everyone walking as though the floors have grown thinner. On the last day the doors of her apartment stand open for the sacrament, and the corridors are full and utterly silent. Thousands of the best-dressed people in Europe standing quite still in the heat, like a field before thunder, and through them comes the priest under the canopy with the viaticum, the little bell going, and every silk knee in Versailles down on the parquet as it passes. She dies on the 30th of July, 1683 in the afternoon. She's 44, the same age as the king. You are in the private rooms when he comes back from her bedside, and this you keep because it is the kind of thing the chamber exists to keep. The king weeps, freely, without management, the way the machine never permits, and says to those near him the sentence that all France will repeat for 100 years, each teller deciding for himself whether it is the tenderest thing a husband ever said or the saddest. That this is the first trouble she has ever given him, the first chagrin in 23 years. You're 17 feet away with a ewer of water going warm in your hands, and you understand both readings at once and decide privately, boy of 16 against the verdict of the coming century, that the king meant it as grief, and that the grief was real, and that it was the grief of a man mourning, along with a wife, his own long unkindness, for the court knows, because the court counts what her patients had to carry, and so do you, who have carried the night lists. That is not a thing you will ever say aloud. You put it where you put the chest that was never a chest. Custom will not let a king keep company with death. Within hours the court is ordered away from the body and the palace of the body. The wagons load in the courtyards through the dusk, and Versailles empties like a basin unstopped, the whole gilded nation rolling off to Fontainebleau through the Auguste dark in mourning cloaks with dust on them. And it is there, at Fontainebleau, in the weeks that follow, in a court dressed in violet and black, in rooms smelling of cypress and hot candle, and the particular staleness of borrowed lodgings, that the chamber begins to notice what this story has been built to tell you. The king is 44. He has buried, within a handful of years, ministers' and mistresses' fortunes, and now a queen. All Europe assumes what Europe always assumes, a new marriage, a new alliance, some infanta or archduchess, a treaty and a wedding dress. The ambassadors are already writing home in cipher about candidates. And the man himself, you see it at the coucher, in the fired clay set of his face as the wig comes off, in the way he has begun, at night, on the edge of the great bed, to sit for a moment quite still with his hands on his knees, like a mason looking at tomorrow's stone. The man himself has gone somewhere private to make a decision, and has taken nobody with him but God, his confessor, and the chamber suspect, one plainly dressed marquise whose fireside is where his afternoons already live. The hours at her apartment do not shorten with the morning, they lengthen. Bontemps says nothing at all now on that subject, which you have learned to read as the loudest register he owns, but in the last days of September, back at Versailles, with the leaves turning along the Grand Canal, he begins, very quietly, to make arrangements you're not asked to understand. An inventory of the private oratory taken by his own hand, alone. A goldsmith's small parcel up the back stair, received by him personally, signed for by no one. A murmured conference in the window bay with the Archbishop of Paris's man that ends the instant the door opens, all three faces turning smooth as ponds. You wind the clocks, you keep your eyes at collar height, and you notice, because a clockmaker's son cannot help noticing it is the family disease, that the machinery of the chamber is being wound tight around some hour that does not appear on any dial in the palace. You do not yet know that you are about to stand for one October night at the very hinge of this reign, posted in a dark corridor outside a chapel that, according to every record in France, held no one at all. Let me be scrupulous with you before I take you into that corridor, because this is the crown jewel of everything the chamber ever kept, and a duel is exactly the kind of thing a storyteller is tempted to polish past the truth. Here is what the record holds, and it is astonishing that it holds anything at all. That the King of France married Françoise d'Aubigné, Marquise de Maintenon, married her truly, before a priest, with the sacrament. No serious historian doubts. That was done at night, in secret, in a private oratory, with a handful of witnesses sworn to silence. The memoirs of the age agree. That among that handful stood Alexandre Bontemps, first valet serving at the Mass itself. The tradition is constant. Of course it was Bontemps. Whom else does this whole story permit? And that no register was signed, no date recorded, no announcement ever made in that century or since, that is the deepest fact of the whole affair. Most who have weighed the evidence set the night in early October the 1683, and some name the 9th passing into the 10th. Others argue for weeks later, or for the new year. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know. A marriage of the King of France, the most public man who has ever lived, a man whose breakfast had witnesses, was made to happen nowhere, on no date, and it held. It is the greatest vanishing act of the age, and the chamber performed it. So the night I now give you is the night the evidence leans toward. Seen from the one post a composite boy could plausibly hold. The corridor is real, the discipline is real. The hour is the tradition's hour. Where the door closes, I will stand with you outside it, because outside it is where you belong, and honesty is the price of the room. Now. It begins as an ordinary evening lying slightly wrong on its foundations, the way a clock case sits wrong by a hair when someone has had the back off it. The coucher runs to the minute. Crowd, candlestick, the named lord flushing with his honour, the waves of glory withdrawing in order. The king is put to bed in form before the eyes of France. The doors close. The palace lets go of the day, 10,000 lives settling floor by floor, and the great rooms go over to the dark and the mice. And then, at some black hour past midnight, the chamber quietly stands back up. The bell over your head does not ring. What wakes you is the ladder, the particular creak of the third rung under a heavy man, and then Bontemps' face at the edge of the loft in the light of a shielded candle, and this alone tells you the size of the night, because in 14 months he has never once come up for himself. He does not speak, he beckons, and is gone, and you are down the ladder in your shirt with your heart going like a verge escapement, dressing in the corridor by feel, and he is waiting. And what he says is this, in a voice level as a sill. Tonight you hold a corridor. You will see persons pass. You are not curious. If any other living soul approaches, you cough once. That is the whole of your office. A pause, and then, because he's the most exact man you will ever serve, you are there to keep the world out, not to look in. There is a difference, and you will keep to your side of it. The private rooms at night are a country you know, but they have never felt like this. Fires banked, one candle in his hand, one given to you, and things subtly out of their sleep. The king's bed, when you pass the open door, lying empty with its curtains drawn back, which at 2 a.m. is a sight so wrong your body startles before your mind does. A cloak over a chair that was not there at the coucher, and the air of the back passages carrying, faint as a thought, 2 smells that do not belong to the hour, fresh candle smoke and incense. He posts you at the mouth of the little corridor on the night side, or at doglegs toward the door of the private oratory, and takes your candle from you, and pinches it out. You stand in the dark. That is the office. A boy of 16, back to the cold panelling, in a passage 4 feet wide, with the last lit thing in your world gone away around the corner in an old man's fist. And when I say dark, I need you to understand what darkness is. In the middle of the night, in the middle of Versailles, in 1683. There is no lamp anywhere that is not a decision. The dark of a palace corridor is the dark of a mine. You cannot see your own hands folded in front of you. Your eyes, having nothing, begin to spend what they have hoarded, faint prickings and false stars, and your ears grow until they are the whole of you. The palace settles, beam by beam, ticking like a cooling stove. Wind works a casement somewhere far off with the sound like a man sighing. Your own blood walks in your ears. You stand, and the cold comes up out of the parquet through your shoes, patient as water, and finds your knees, and you begin to understand that the office of this night is not watching. It is a kind of kneeling. It is a vigil, in the old hard sense your grandmother would have known, and your body has begun to pray with cold before your mind has been told anything at all. They come with almost no light and almost no sound. You hear them long before, doors far off, opened by hands that know how, the grain of floors changing under careful feet, and then around the far turn a glow, 1 candle's worth, and in it, for the seconds it takes them to cross your dogleg and reach the oratory door, the procession that is not happening. A priest in a plain cloak over vestments, and even in 1 candle's worth of light you know the profile from 100 public masses. Not a curate, not a chaplain. The Archbishop of Paris himself, walking at midnight like a smuggler. Behind him a second churchman, smaller, in black. The king's confessor, the Jesuit, Père de la Chaise, whose whole quiet employment these past months has been, you will understand later, the conscience side of this night. Then 2 gentlemen you do not let yourself name even inwardly, though one governs the household of the king's legitimated children, and the other's dispatch boxes you have carried. Witnesses by their bearing, men wearing the particular stillness of those chosen, precisely because they have spent their lives being unremarkable. Then the king. In darkness, out of ceremony, a king is a big middle-aged man in a plain coat, walking softly in his own house. That is what passes you at arm's length. Not the son of the emblems, but a man with his jaw set the way it is set at the difficult councils, a man doing the single most considered thing of his life, and doing it, for once in that life, with nobody watching. Except that this is the joke God has built into your whole employment. Somebody is always watching. Tonight the entire audience of the Sun King is one shivering garson flattened against the panelling, and he does not so much as turn his head. And at his side, in dark clothes, with her hand resting on his offered wrist as lightly as a folded glove, the Marquise. You cannot see her face. You will be glad of that later, that the record in your head holds no stolen expression to be tempted to sell to posterity. Only the shape of the 2 of them in 1 candle's light, walking to their wedding through a sleeping house, and behind them Bontemps, carrying the light itself as he has carried everything else. The oratory door closes with a click no louder than a watch case. What comes through it for the better part of an hour is nearly nothing, and the nearly is the treasure of your whole life. The murmur of the Latin, rising and falling, a mass, unmistakably, at an hour when no mass in Christendom should be. You cannot make out 3 words together, and the 3 you think you catch are the 3 any wedding would give you. Once the small bright shiver of the sacring bell, tiny as a coin dropped on marble, instantly smothered, and at that sound, alone in the blind cold, you go down on one knee on the parquet, because whatever is or is not happening on the other side of that door, the host is the host, and a boy from Blois knows what the bell means. Once two voices, a man's and then a woman's, each speaking briefly, each answered by the priest's, the shape of vows, worn smooth of words by the door between you. And once, near the end, quite distinctly through the panels, Bontemps' voice in the responses, serving. The first valet of France, answering the mass at his master's secret wedding, which is, you will think for the rest of your life, the truest sentence anyone could ever write about either man. Then nothing. The door, the candle, the procession recrossing your dogleg the other way. The king and the marquise pass you first, and now her hand is not resting on his wrist. His hand and hers are simply held plainly, like any two people in any lane in France. And behind them the churchman and the unremarkable gentleman, and last Bontemps, who stops, level with you, holds his candle a little aside so that its light finds your face, and looks at you for what a clock would swear was 2 seconds, and your bones will insist was much longer. Whatever he is looking for, fear, glee, the particular glitter of a boy composing a story to tell, he does not find it. You give him collar height and folded hands and nothing, nothing, nothing. The very grain of the panelling behind you, and the corner of his mouth moves, not a smile, the sight where a smile was considered and declined, and he goes. You hold the corridor till the grey comes up. Those are your orders, shape, if not their letter. No one dismissed you, so you stay, while the dark thins and the passage assembles itself around you out of nothing. Sill, dado, door frame. And your knees deliver their bill, and somewhere below the kitchens light their first fires, and the ordinary blessed daytime machine begins to turn as if this night had never been inside it. Before you leave the dogleg, you do the one disobedient thing of your whole vigil, so small and so enormous. At the sconce nearest the oratory door, where a taper burned down in the night hours while a king was married, you take the stub, thumb length, still faintly warm at its root, or you imagine so, smelling of honey and smoke like every stub in your box under the mattress, and unlike every one of them, because this one is the only object in the world that was awake with you. It goes into your fist and your fist into your pocket, not to sell. The one candle end in Versailles you will never ever sell. And in the chamber that morning, the gun that has been hanging on the wall since the first page of this story quietly fires. Every dawn for 14 months you have watched Bontemps burn the night list. Every visitor, every courier, every name and hour written in his hand and fed to the fire that warms the king's shirt. This morning he stands at the little table at the usual minute, and there is no paper in his hand. Nothing was written. There is nothing to burn. For one night in the reign of Louis XIV, the most carefully recorded man in the world, the record was not made and then destroyed. It was never made at all. A hole in history cut with a tailor's care, and you are one of perhaps 8 living souls who know the shape of what the hole is keeping. The night's history rises past the king's shirt as no smoke whatsoever. He catches you understanding it. Of course he does. Catching understanding is his trade. And what he gives you is a single sentence, without turning from the fire, the sentence you will hand on, an old man yourself, to whatever apprentice God assigns you, because it is the whole ethic of this room in 11 words. The best kept secret, boy, is the one that was never a secret, because nothing ever happened. Afterward, this is the part no one believes, and it is the part you would swear to last. Nothing changes. No announcement, that day or ever. No new queen. France is never told it has anything to be told. The Marquise's rank does not alter. She is addressed as she was addressed. The court goes on guessing for years. Some seasons hot, some cold. Pamphlets in Holland printing what pamphlets print. And the guessing itself becomes a kind of fog the secret sleeps inside. Because a thing rumoured forever is a thing never quite known. What changes is small, and only the chamber sees it. Her apartment and his are now the two ends of one life, and the king's evenings settle there as if a wheel had found its bearing. And at her door, which is the one threshold in France past which even the first valet does not go unbidden, the King of France knocks, and waits to be bidden. You have seen it. The machine has no ceremony for it. It needs none. It is a man at his wife's door. You go up to the soupente when Colin relieves you, dead on your feet and you cannot sleep, and for once the insomnia is a wage. You lie under the ridge with the candle stub in your fist and the whole palace turning below you like a wheel, and near the little dormer the morning is coming up gold over the gardens, so you kneel to it and look out, and this is the view you will carry out of these 4 years above every other. The terraces descending in their great stone breadths, the parterres drawn like scroll-work on a watchback, the Grand Canal laid flat and shining clear to the west, a mile of poured silver with the mist walking off it, and the avenues of young trees striding out into France in lines a ruler would envy, and far off eastward the smoke of Paris like a thumb smudge on the sky. 10,000 souls below you, and 36,000 at the works, and 400 rooms of state, all of it built so that everything about one man could be seen, and you, 16, unslept, at the highest, cheapest window in the palace, holding in your closed hand the proof of the one night that wasn't. You are nothing in this view, a dust mote at the top of a machine for making glory. But the machine's most private turning passed within your arm's reach in the dark, and trusted you, and you held. Barely a cog, but a cog in the greatest clock ever built, and last night for 6 hours you were the click of its secret gear. That is enough. You sleep at last with your fist still closed. What the chamber sees, the chamber keeps. What the chamber keeps, it keeps forever. After that night the years pick up speed, the way years do once you've stopped counting your own place in them. The seasons take over the story for a while. Let them. This is a story for sleep after all, and seasons are the breathing of a palace. 1684, and the machine at its magnificent full stroke. The court swells. The north wing comes out of its scaffolding cage one bay at a time. The fountains are rehearsed for weeks before the great entertainments, because the waters of Versailles are a war the king is fighting against geography itself. There is never enough water. The pumps at Marly are rising on the Seine like a wonder of the world. 14 great wheels to push a river uphill, and still on ordinary days the fountaineers run ahead of the king's promenade, turning fountains on before him and off behind him, so that his majesty walks through a garden that is only fully alive in the exact bubble of his own attention. Colin shows you that from a service door one afternoon, the two of you watching the jets rise ahead of the little strolling storm of courtiers and die away after it. And he says, not smiling for once, "There it is, boy, the whole of Versailles in one trick of plumbing." Everything is true wherever he is looking. Learn what that costs the men who run with the keys. You're 17, then 18. Your wage creeps to 400 livres with the night duties. Your box of candle stubs pays a tailor. You send money to Blois twice a year with a carrier you trust, and your mother sends back a letter each Christmas in her careful hand, asking if you have seen the king, and you write back truthfully that you see him every day, and do not write the rest of the truth, which is that you have seen him as no subject sees him, asleep, unwigged, wet, human, and that you have stopped being able to explain to anyone from the old life what your employment is. Keeper of the difference between a man and the sun. There is no guild for it. The chamber changes crew the way ships do. The second garçon of the other shift finishes his time and goes. A new boy comes up from the wardrobe green as you were and drops a candlestick in his first week at the Couche. The crash like a cannon in that silence, 100 courtiers turning, the boy white as tallow. And it is you, to your own surprise, who steps past him smoothly to take up the wreckage, you who says to him afterward in the service room with Colin's exact intonation of 3 years before, "It gets easier. Nobody died." In this room that is the only sentence that matters. Nobody died. And Colin himself in the spring of 1685 gets what he has been quietly buying with a decade of perfect silence, a purchase step up and out, a valet's post in the household of one of the great families, real money, a wife in prospect. His last morning, he empties his leather pouch of candle ends into your hands, the whole day's harvest, formally, like a man handing over a seal of office. Keep the weight straight, he says, ears sticking out under his cap, half smile in place and his eyes not smiling at all, and mind the stairs for me. Then he's gone down the service corridor for the last time, and you are the senior garçon of the shift, and the ladder creaks under other newer boys, and you find you miss the arithmetic of his silences the way you miss home cooking, dully at odd hours. And through these same years, while the palace performs its noon, the chamber is learning the other thing, the thing this whole story now begins its long turn toward. The king's body is starting to lose arguments. You see it where only the chamber can, in the margins, at the hinges of the day. The gout first, the right foot, then either foot. There are mornings the first steps from the bed are taken on the arm of the first valet, carefully before the doors open, and the walk becomes the walk of the Sun King, which is a performance the way everything is, and one whose cost is settled privately, at night, in the private rooms, with the foot up on a stool and the face allowed at last to admit what the foot thinks. The digestion, always dramatic, grows operatic. Daquin's purges are their own weather system now, and there are days of the month fixed as feasts given over entirely to medicine, the king taking his terrible physic in the morning and holding council in bed in the afternoon, indomitable, working while his insides do battle. And the court is told it is nothing, and believes, because the supper that evening is eaten au grand couvert with the old siege army appetite, publicly, magnificently. The supper is always eaten. Remember why. The eating is the proof of the sun, which is exactly what makes the teeth the cruelest chapter, and the one the chamber had to carry longest. His teeth have seen bad all his life. The physicians who examined him in youth wrote of it. Sweets and time and the age's dentistry, which is a strong man with an iron key, have done the rest. Through these years the upper left side goes from bad to disaster, abscess upon abscess, the jaw aching him through councils and chapel, and the long-standing ceremonies, a pain you can watch if you are the sort of boy who watches at collar height, arriving and being mastered in the working of his cheek, mastered always, because a king's face is state property, and he governs it like a province. And in 1685, the year all Europe is watching him revoke his grandfather's edict and turn the Huguenots out of the law's shelter, the year of his greatest apparent height, the decision is taken in the private rooms, among the physicians, quietly, that the whole rotten upper left must come out. It is done there, behind the machine, no lever crowd, no gazette. The chamber prepares the room and the chamber cleans it afterward, and you are 18 years old, holding the basin. I will spare you what a story for sleep should be spared, and tell you only what the record itself preserves, which is grave enough. The extractions are brutal, as all extractions of the age are brutal. A conscious man in a chair, iron in the mouth, no mercy anywhere in nature's pharmacy, stronger than wine and courage. And they go wrong. The instruments, taking the teeth, take too much. Part of the upper jaw itself, and with it the floor of all that side, so that when it's over and the wounds have knit as much as they ever will, there is a hole, an opening in the roof of the king's mouth, up into the passages of the nose. This is not rumour. This is the sober report of his own medical journal, the register the physicians keep year over year on the king's body, as though it were the weather of France, and it records, with a clerk's calm, the consequence that you, holding the ewer at private meals, saw with your own eyes, that when the king drinks, the water is apt to come back out through his nose. Like a fountain, the journal says. The physicians of France, writing of the Sun King in the Palace of the Thousand Fountains, chose that word themselves, and because the wound will not close and turns foul, the remedy is the age's remedy, the actual cautery, a small iron heated in a chafing dish to the colour of a rose, carried into the roof of a living man's mouth to burn the passage clean and sear it shut, and this not once. The journal counts the sessions across that winter, as a farmer counts frosts. The chamber is there. The chamber holds the basin and the lights and the door. The king sits in the chair with his hands on his knees like a mason looking at stone, and does not cry out. You will not swear he made no sound at all. You will swear you never heard the sound a lesser man would count as one. And between sessions he rises, is dressed, goes out through the doors, and is the sun. And now the supper. Now you understand, listener, why I made you stand so long at the grand couvert back at the beginning of our nights together, watching him eat. Because the performance does not stop. It cannot. The appetite of the king is a public institution, proof nightly renewed that France is well. So the machine adapts, in the caterer's cellars and the chamber's margins, in 100 silent accommodations that no courtier at the rail will ever be allowed to assemble into a picture. The meats that reach him are chosen, and carved to be managed by a mouth with one working side, done in the serving, in the saucing, never visibly, never spoken. The bread is the crumb, not the crust. He swallows. The memoirs of the age will complain, almost without chewing. The wits will call it appetite, and the chamber will hear the wits and say nothing, knowing it is armour. His wine at the public table is watered. The drinking is managed in small exact draughts, the head held so, and if on a bad night the fountain betrays him, it happened. It is in the record. I will not paint it. It is a napkin's work and a servant's angle of body and a sentence begun by someone well trained. And the table talks on, and no one has seen anything, because the price of seeing is understood by every servant in the room without one word ever having established it. Hundreds of witnesses, nightly, for years. And the mouth of the King of France kept its state secret in plain sight at a lit table, which is, if you want it in one image, the entire genius of the house you've given your youth to. He is 47, that winter of the irons. In the mirrors of the great gallery he is guilt and glory to the ambassadors of Siam. In the private rooms he is a heavy man breathing carefully over a chafing dish, gripping his own knees. Both are true. The chamber's whole employment is that only one of them shall ever be history. So when, in the year that follows, the body loses its next argument, the last one this story will ask you to keep, understand that the men in the private rooms do not meet it as something new. They meet it as the same long war, moved to worse ground. And this time the enemy is in a place that cannot be performed around, a place where the machine of publicity, for the first time in the reign, is of no use at all, a place not to be delicate past honesty, at the very seat of the king, where sitting itself, riding itself, the throne itself in the plainest sense, becomes the battlefield. The year is 1686. The chamber is about to keep its masterpiece. It begins in the cold months as a small, hard swelling where a man sits, noted by the physicians in their registra with their usual weather clock calm, watched, poulticed, hoped about. Hope is not a treatment. Through the spring it declares itself what the surgeons already grimly suspected. A fistula, a false channel burrowed by abscess through the flesh beside the body's most humbling passage. The sort of injury poor men get from hard riding and bad seats no one names in company, and kings get exactly the same way, because the saddle does not read genealogy. The king has spent 40 years on horseback, and a lifetime on the purges of his physicians. Now, at the seat of the most enthroned man in human history, at the precise point of contact between majesty and chair, nature has installed a small, exquisitely painful rebellion, and every remedy the age keeps on its shelves, the poultices, the fomentations, the mineral drenches, fails against it, one by one, through the long, humiliating summer. They even try the waters. Barège, in the far Pyrenees, has a name for healing such wounds, and the journeys half considered, the King of France hauled the length of his kingdom to sit in a mountain spring. And here is a detail preserved in the sober accounts, which I give you because nothing I could invent would tell you more truly what it is to be the body of the state. They do not send the king, they send the illness on ahead. Men afflicted as he is afflicted, poor men, patients gathered from the hospitals, are dispatched to Barège to take the waters in his place, human trial pieces, so that the physicians may read in their flesh whether the cure is worth the king's dignity. The waters, on the evidence of the borrowed bodies, are not worth it. The idea is dropped. The men are sent home, having served the crown with their wounds, unnamed in every account but this one breath of yours tonight. Say what you like about the age. You were there, and you may only say it quietly, but it knew, all the way down, exactly whose pain existed to spare whose. That leaves the knife. Understand what is actually at stake, because this is the hinge the whole autumn swings on, and the court never knows the hinge exists. Surgery, in 1686, is not a profession that shares a bench with medicine. Physicians are gowned doctors of the schools. Surgeons are craftsmen with knives, one guild removed from the barbers, and no one has ever done what is now proposed, not on a king. The operation for fistula is known. It is done in the hospitals on the poor, with the mortality you would expect in a world without anaesthesia and without the least idea of what makes wounds fester. To lay open a channel of that kind cleanly, through that flesh, at that depth, and have the man neither die of it nor be left ruined. This is craft at the very edge of what the century can do, and the man it must be done to is the man whose death would tip the balance of Europe, and whose courage cannot be doubted, but whose body has just spent a winter being burned in the mouth with irons, and knows precisely what surgeons' promises weigh. The task is given to Felix, quiet Felix of the 6 words, who has waited at the 8 o'clock door for something to go wrong for 20 years, and this is it, arrived at last with the whole reign on its back. And what Felix does with the task, this is documented. This is the part historians retell with a kind of awe, and the chamber watched it from the inside, is disappear into preparation with a thoroughness that would be called cold if it were not the purest fidelity in the whole story. Through the summer and autumn, in the hospitals of Paris, on poor men afflicted as the king is afflicted, the first surgeon practices, operation after operation, the same cut in the same flesh. The accounts speak of dozens upon dozens of such patients under his hands in those months, each one teaching his fingers a little more of the country, each one pairing a second here and a false motion there. The registers say he practised. The darker whispers of the age said more, said some of those nameless men practised upon are buried without their story. And there, precisely there, this channel's rule holds, I sell you no whisperer's record. What is certain is grim enough to carry the scene, that the road to the king's cure ran through the bodies of the poor again, and every man of them anonymous, again, and that when Felix at last judged his hand ready, it was because other flesh had paid his tuition. He has an instrument made for the day to his own drawing, a long narrow blade curved and sheathed to ride the channel and cut only where cutting serves, a scalpel that will be called, forever after, royal, the bistouri à la royale. It exists to this day. You can stand in a museum in Paris, a person of the age of aeroplanes, and look through glass at the actual curve of steel this whole night of your listening has been bending toward. And around all of it, this is the chamber's share, and it is as absolute a piece of work as the marriage. The silence is built. The court knows nothing. Grasp that. The court, the 10,000, the ambassadors with their ciphers, the gazettes, nothing. The king is unwell in some unspecified degree. The king has a humour, an indisposition. The autumn is full of vague words and confident suppers. He is in pain that would put a strong man to bed, and he performs the day, council, chapel, the walk among the fountains a little shortened, the coucher with the named lord holding the candle, every piece of the machine turning on schedule precisely so that no one shall wonder what the machine might be concealing. The secret circle can be counted on 2 hands. Maintenon, who is with him now in everything. Louvois, the great war minister, because the state must have one minister who knows. The confessor, the physicians, Felix, Bontemps, and under Bontemps, mute as furniture, the chamber. You are 19 years old, and you carry the King of France's most dangerous secret through the corridors twice a day in a basin under a linen cloth, past dukes who would each give a year of rents to know it, and your face, you have been told by the man who trained your face, is very good. Through October, the practised hand and the prepared room wait only for the word. The king gives it in his own way. Suddenly, at last, without theatre, in the private rooms, in November, the decision of a man who has measured his own margin and will not spend another month of nights on it. The accounts differ on his exact words. The oldest tradition gives them plainly, addressed to Felix, and they need no polishing. Do it, and do it as if I were any man. The morning is set. The court is told nothing. The evening before, the caucha runs entire, crowd, candlestick, glory in waves, and you stand at the wall and watch 100 of the best informed people in France bow themselves out of the bedchamber of a man they do not know is to be cut open at dawn, and you understand that you are watching the machine perform its absolute masterwork. Versailles keeping a secret from Versailles, in Versailles, in plain sight, perfectly. You do not sleep the night of the 17th of November, neither, you are certain, the cock creaks its own register. Does the man on the drawbridge bed at the foot of his master's. Some hours before dawn the chamber simply stands up, unrung, the way it stood up on a certain October night 3 years before, and begins. Monday, the 18th of November, 1686. What you do in the black end of the night is what you did on your first morning, and the circle closing is so exact that your body notices it before your mind. You build up the fire, and you stand before it with your arms straight out, warming linen. Not a shirt this time. Bandage linen, lint and compress and roller, basket upon basket, warmed through so that nothing cold shall touch him, and your shoulders take up their old first morning burn, and you hold the ache the way you have learned in 4 years to hold everything, without spending it. Around you the private rooms fill with quiet, exact traffic. Water heating, the physicians, Daquin and Fagon, in the outer room with their vials. Louvois, hugely out of place and rigidly still. The marquise, the wife. In this room, on this morning, let the record for once stand straight. The wife, near the window in grey, her needlework in her lap untouched, her stillness the deepest in the palace. Père de Lachaise with his office open, and Felix sleeves back, laying out upon a napkin the sheathed curve of steel that his summer of nameless men has taught, checking its seat the way your father checked an escapement. Once, twice, done. At 7 o'clock or near it, the king wakes without being waked, and says, in substance, the tradition has kept the shape of it, that he is ready, and that it is to be done now. Your post is the anteroom door, the threshold of the chamber from the outside facing back down the passage. Bontemps' disposition, and you know by now to read his placements like scripture. The world is to be kept out. You are the keeping. So what you have of the next hour, and this is right, this is the honest architecture of your whole employment. Witness at the edge, never at the centre, is the door at your back, and the passage before you going grey with morning, and sounds. The bed has been arranged with pillows so, the light stands so. You saw that much before the door. What comes through the oak afterward is little, and the little is enormous. The low voice of Felix giving quiet directions to his assisting hands, a craftsman's voice, unhurried, the voice men use over fine close work, and you think, absurdly, uncontrollably, of your father bent under the lamp at Blois. Movement once, of several people shifting weight at the same moment, and then the sound you will keep to the end of your life and never once describe to another living soul. Not a scream. There is no scream. All the accounts agree there was never a scream, and the accounts for once are telling the truth. But twice, perhaps 3 times across the long minutes, through oak and distance, a deep short escaped syllable, half word and half breath. the sound of a man calling on God in the smallest possible coin, because he will not spend the larger. My God! And then the craftsman's voice again, level as before. It goes on longer than you believe it can. The passage grows lighter by degrees around your sentry stillness. Your hands, folded, have whitened at the knuckles without your leave. Collar height, breath even, face nothing. While 8 feet behind your shoulder blades, the age's entire balance lies face down under a curve of steel in the hands of a man whose tuition was paid by the anonymous poor. Then it is over. It is over the way storms are over. A change in the grain of sounds, water poured, low voices overlapping with the tension gone out of their spacing, furniture set back. The door opens past you, and the basins go through, and the warmed linen, your linen, arms ache and all, laid now where no shirt of state will ever be seen. And within the hour you hear it with your own ears through the opened inner doors, because he insists the doors be opened. The king's voice, weak, level, unmistakable, asking. The tradition keeps this too, and it is the whole man in one question, whether it went well for Felix. And now the piece of this day that no surgeon performed, the piece that belongs to the machine, and the machine performs it before the wound is 6 hours old. The word cannot be kept now. The court must be told something, and so it is told everything and nothing. An operation entirely successful, the king well. And to make the telling true, because at Versailles nothing is true until it has been seen, the doors are managed, and that same afternoon the machine runs its performance over the body one more time. Council is held at the bedside. The ministers file in, and the king, propped grey-faced on the pillows of the great bed with the fresh wound banked beneath him, conducts the business of France in an even voice for as long as the business takes, and the court is let in its waves to pay its respects, and receives from the bed a composed sovereign making dry small jokes at his own expense, and files out entirely reassured, which is to say entirely deceived. For the marvel is done with mirrors like every marvel in this house. They were shown the sun, and the sun does not suffer. You stand at the wall through all of it, holding the ewer, watching a man perform serenity over a fire in his own flesh, with the same governed cheek muscle you first learned to read across a toothache years ago, and you think, you cannot stop the thought, it arrives with the force of the whole 4 years behind it, that of all the courage this reign'll get itself remembered for, on horseback, under standards, this is the specimen the chamber would enter in evidence, an afternoon of small dry jokes propped upright on agony, so that France would not be afraid. The encatre that night is set out as always, 3 loaves and the 2 bottles under the white cloth, against the chance that the king should wake hungry. It stands till morning untouched. Of course untouched, and when you clear it away at dawn you find you cannot eat your perquisite the first time in 4 years, and you give the king's bread to the newest boy, who is 15, and frightened, and does not yet know how to stand. And at the little table by the reborn fire, Bontemps, grey with his own unslept night, writes out the night list in his careful hand, every entrance, every hour, the whole guarded traffic of the extraordinary dark, reads it once and feeds it to the flame under the warming linen. Some nights make no smoke at all. This one made a little. History, as usual, was warming the next shirt. The weeks that follow are the quietest of your 4 years, and the truest. And this is where the story begins to let you down gently towards sleep, because after the knife comes the healing, and healing is the slowest story ever told. And it is told entirely in rooms you know by heart, at the pace of linen. Do not imagine the cure arriving like a verdict. It arrives like a season. The wound must heal open from the bottom upward. That is the whole art. That is why the cutting was done at all. And so the dressings become the clock of the king's life, morning and evening, Felix's unhurried hands and the warmed lint, and the chamber moving around the bed in its practised orbit. There are bad days. There are days in the first fortnight when the healing goes crooked, when hard, proud flesh closes where it should not. And in early December Felix must take up steel again, more than once. The register counts it plainly. Small corrections, mercifully brief, born the way the first was born, with the doors shut and the machine performing wellness 30 feet away. You will not pretend to have loved those mornings. The passage outside the door again, the folded hands again, the small escaped syllables again, of a man paying retail for every inch of his recovery. But each time the craftsman's voice is a shade easier at the finish, and by the year's turning even Daquin's professional gloom can find nothing to bill against. And somewhere in January the registrar writes down what the chamber's hands have known for weeks by the feel of the lint. Closed, sound, healed. 2 months from the curve of steel to a whole man. In that century on that wound, it is as close to a miracle as surgery will come for another 200 years, and it was built, every inch of it, out of one craftsman's borrowed practice and one patient's granite, and the chamber's silence holding the weather out. The king's first full day back in the saddle of his ceremonies, you stand at the wall of the lever and watch the shirt ascend through its 4 pairs of hands to a man restored, and the 100 faces at the rail wear their relief like new clothes, and you find your own eyes stinging, which is unprofessional, and you place your gaze at collar height and breathe until it passes. Nobody died. In this room, that is the whole of every prayer. Outside the rail that winter, France finds out, in the strange half-focused way the machine permits. And what France does with the news belongs to another of these nights, and I will give it only its one nod here, as agreed between us and the shape of this telling. The country, learning that its king had been in danger and was delivered, went shortly mad with relief, and the season rang with thanksgivings, and a Te Deum was sung, and out of that ringing winter came, among other things, a tune of celebration whose long, strange afterlife, you may have heard me tell it, ended up in another country's anthem entirely. The bells, the bonfires, the verses, the delirium of a public that had never once been told what it was almost told, all that is the outside of the story, the sunlit side, and it has been sung and can be found. You lived the inside, where the only anthem was the fire ticking under warmed lint at 6 in the morning, and where the whole triumph, arriving, weighed exactly as much as an old man at little table deciding, one more dawn, what the flame should be fed. Felix is made rich, lands, money in the grand style, the kind of reward that founds a family, and the age, needing its legend, will tell forever after that the first surgeon's hand, so steady on the day itself, trembled ever after when it took up a blade. They say it, the memoirs say it, and I hand it to you marked as what it is, a saying, too perfect to trust and too true shape to leave out. What you can witness to is smaller and better, that on an ordinary morning, some weeks into the king's soundness, at the 8 o'clock entry, you saw the King of France interrupt the machine, a thing he does not do, to speak to his surgeon quietly at length, out of all ceremony, and that Felix, the man of 6 words, bowed and answered with 2. and that Bontemps, watching, wore for one full second the expression of a connoisseur before a masterwork. 3 old men who among them had carried the rain across a knife's width, agreeing in 11 syllables to say no more about it. You were the 4th thing in that conversation, the wall of it, and you would not trade your place in it for the candlestick honour of every coucher of the rain. And then, this is the part of every true story that no teller can soften, so let it simply come. The years do what years do. They go on being ordinary, one lever and one coucher at a time, until one day you count them and they have become your whole youth. You serve on past your 20th year, into the rain's high plateau. The palace finishes another wing and begins another. The machine turns. The king grows sounder than his physicians deserve and older than his portraits admit. The marquise's fireside remains the still centre of the whole spinning gilded wheel, and the court never stops guessing, and the guessing never once hardens into knowledge, and you understand at last that it never will, that you and a handful of others will carry to your graves a plain fact about France that France is not to have. It is a strange possession, a secret grown quiet. It stops feeling like a flame you are hiding and becomes a stone you are carrying smooth, not heavy, always there, warmed by your own warmth like everything long carried. Some nights in the Supente, listening to a new boy's frightened breathing across the loft, you take the thought out and look at it. I stood in the corridor. I heard the little bell, and put it away again, and it is enough to have looked. You never say it. Not to Colin, the one time he comes back through in his fine new livery with a wife on his arm and stands you a jug in the town and asks, ears and half-smile unchanged, what he missed. You give him collar height and the truth, clocks, laundry, weather. He studies you a long moment, this boy who taught you to stand, and what moves behind his eyes is not suspicion, it is recognition. He lifts the jug an inch. Mind the stairs, he says, and lets it lie, and that is the closest you ever come, in a long life, to telling. In time your own turn arrives as Colin's arrived, as it arrives for every garçon, the purchase step, the place found for you, through Bontemps' offices, of course, since no one leaves the chamber except along a path he has smoothed. And there comes a last morning when you bank the fire you first fed at 15, and hand the ring of little clock keys to a boy whose arms have not yet learned the warming frame ache, and tell him the only thing worth telling, which is how to stand. Weight on both feet, hands visible, eyes at collar height, low enough to be nothing, high enough to see everything. The rest, what the room will ask of him, what nights will stand up unrung, the room itself will teach, as it taught you, as it taught the man on the drawbridge cot, who on your last morning looks up from the little table where a paper is curling into flame, and gives you, in full, the 2 seconds of his eyes, and says, the longest speech he ever spent on you, that your father, the clockmaker, is owed a letter from him, and that the letter will say the work was sound. That is all. That is everything. You go down the marble stairs through the wake-in machine with your box of candle stubs under your arm and one stub in your breast pocket that is not for sale, and out into a France that will never know your name, which is, you finally understand, precisely the wage. You kept the rain's secret so well that history itself was successfully kept from noticing you were ever in the room. What becomes of you after? The trade, the town, whom you loved, how long you lived. This story will not invent because you were never one boy. You were all of them, the whole unnamed shift of them across the wage books of those years, and whatever each became, History closed over them like the sea over a wake, which is what they would have wanted, being everyone professionals. Only hold this. Somewhere in France, for 50 more years, there were old men mending clocks and keeping shops and dozing by fires who had heard the sacring bell ring at 2 a.m. through an oratory door, and who read, in gazettes, decade after decade, confident histories of a court they had carried in their arms, histories with the wrong knights in them, and who folded the paper and stirred the fire and said nothing at all. The deepest vault the age ever built was not the sealed coffer behind the panelling. It was the ordinary discretion of ordinary men, renewed daily until death, unpaid past 300 livres a year, unbroken. That vault has never been opened. It never will be. Everything this episode has told you leaked from the edges of grander witnesses, the memoirists, the physicians' registre, the traditions of the great families. The garçons leaked nothing. The silence of the chamber's small men is the one perfect artifact of the reign, and the master of that silence outlasted almost everything he kept. Alexandre Bontemps served on first valet, governor of the palace, keeper of the night lists, through the turn of the century into his 70s, the drawbridge cot at the foot of the great bed occupied by that same heavy faithful body for year upon year, until he had slept his life away at the feet of his masters. He died in January of 1701, at Versailles. Where else? He was Versailles, the part of it that never got painted. At 74, having served one king for half a century, and the memoirists of the court, who agreed on nothing, agreed on him. The most trusted, the most silent, the most quietly powerful servant of the age, mourned by the king. The accounts allow us this, as one mourns not a servant but a limb. His sons and his sons' sons held the office after him. Bontemps following Bontemps at the foot of the royal beds of France for 100 years, a dynasty of discretion, as though silence itself had been made hereditary in one family like a fief, and the night you hear of his death, you're past 30, in your own house, with the fire low. You take from its box a thumb-length of candle, honey and smoke, 30 years old, the only object on earth that stood the corridor with you, and you light it at last and let it burn to nothing on your own table. One small unexplained flame on a January night, the year's coldest, in a town where nobody knows what you know. It burns perhaps a quarter hour. You watch it the whole way down. Somewhere in that quarter hour you say aloud to no one in the empty room, the only eulogy the man would have accepted, nothing ever happened, and the wax pools and the little light stands and leans and goes out. And that, you think, is the whole art, the entire art of the best man you ever served. To be the flame the great events were lit by, and to leave, on purpose, no stub. The secrets themselves, since a story about keeping ought to tell you honestly how each one ended, had long lives and quiet deaths, and you may count them over now like a shelf of closed boxes drowsily, one by one, the way you might count anything at the end of a long day. The sealed pages of the poisons, the chest that was never a chest, the weight moved behind the panelling in your first winter, kept their darkness for 27 years. Then, in the summer of 1709, an old king in a palace grown quiet had the sealed papers brought to him at last and burned. Not by a servant. He did not delegate that fire. The record, for even this made a record, 1 line's worth, which is how we know, says the documents of the affair were destroyed, and the age understood, without needing to say, that the king had chosen to leave history a hole where its worst question had been. He was 70 years old. He'd outlived nearly everyone the pages named. It was the night list rule, you would have thought, had you lived to hear of it, grown to its final size. What cannot be safely kept is burned, and what is burned was never written, and what was never written never happened. And history's little revenge, which Bontemps could have predicted with that unsmiling mouth of his. We know the shape of what burned anyway, because the old policeman La Reynie had kept his own working notes, and the notes outlived the fire. Even kings, it turns out, can only burn their own copy. Remember that, on your way down into sleep. It is oddly comforting. Nothing is ever quite as burned as the burner hopes. Nothing is ever quite as safe as the keeper fears. And the world goes on running anyway, on warmed shirts and watered wine and men who mind the stairs. The people of those years went their ways too, each at the pace of his own clock, and you may set their boxes on the shelf beside the secrets, closed and quiet. Madame de Montespan, the loud magnificence whose loudness had been the weather of your first seasons, whose name was in the pages that burned or was said to be, and no storyteller honest with you will ever say more than said, lingered on at court for years inside the shell of her splendour, an ambassadress of what had been, until in 1691 she left Versailles at last and for good, and gave her remaining years to penance so severe it startled the pious. Hair shirts under the famous elegance, vigils, her fortune flowing out to the poor as once it had flowed from the treasury toward her. The age, which had trembled at her, ended by being edified by her, which she would once have found the crueller sentence. Louvois, the war minister who stood rigid and out of place by the window on the morning of the knife, died in harness that same year, 1691, suddenly, between a council and a supper, proof that the state's iron men go out like anyone, mid-errand. Daquin, perfumed, glittering, ambitious Daquin, who read the king's body like a banker and never missed a morning at the 8 o'clock door, fell as courtiers fall, all at once and without weather warnings, dismissed in a single November stroke in 1693, banished from the paradise of proximity, the court agreeing comfortably afterward, as courts do, that he had asked too often and too largely, and leaned on a patronage that was no longer there to lean on. He had stood closer to the king's living body than almost any man in France, and it saved him nothing, and the lesson rippled through every antechamber in the palace, and was memorized by everyone and changed no one's behaviour at all. His place went to grave, misshapen, brilliant fagon, and the register of the royal body simply continued in a new hand, because the machine does not grieve, it re-inks, and quiet Felix, rich Felix of the steady hand and the 6 words, outlived his masterpiece by 17 years and died in 1703 in his bed, full of honours, having never once, in all that time, in an age that would have paid him any price for it, published so much as a paragraph about the morning of the 18th of November. The surgeon kept like a valet. He had been in the room, you see. It marks a man. Only the garçons have no boxes on the shelf, because history never issued them any, and by now you know that this is not an oversight to be mourned, but the very shape of the service. The whole point arrived at last. The others were remembered because they were someone, and the chamber's small men were trusted precisely because they were no one, and no one is a thing you can be perfectly, all the way down, for a whole life, if you stand right and keep the weight straight. You were no one with the best of them, those 4 years. Let the shelf stand as it stands. The marriage kept best of all, because it was kept the deepest way, not hidden, but never constituted as a fact that could be found. The king and the marquise lived out 3 decades as the strangest open secret in Europe. He knocking at her door to his life's end, she growing old in plain wool at the still centre of the gilded wheel, uncrowned, unannounced, undeniable. When he lay dying, September of 1715, 4 days short of 77, in the great bedchamber, publicly, ceremonially, dying as he had dressed, before witnesses, the machine faithful to the last hour. She left for the school she'd founded at Saint-Cyr before the end came, and lived there 4 years more among her schoolgirls, and went to her grave never once having been called, in any law or register of France, what she had been since a certain unrecorded night in October of 1683, his wife. No date was ever produced. No document has ever surfaced. 300 years of archives have been shaken since by scholars with lamps your century lit, and the night has never fallen out of them. The chamber's masterpiece holds to this hour. You heard the sacring bell through a door, and the door, for all of history's pulling, is shut yet. And the body, the poor, magnificent, betrayed, enduring body that was the chamber's whole daily employment, the body ended as bodies end, and the machine served it to the threshold and passed. He outlived his son and his son's son, and was succeeded by a great-grandson aged 5. They opened him afterward as the age opened kings, and the physicians marvelled at the scale of the organs, and the register of his health, teeth, irons, fountains, fistula, and all, was closed at last after 60 years of entries, and survives, and can be read, so that we know the Sun King's insides better than we know the outsides of almost anyone else who's ever lived. The most watched man in the world, watched even in dissection. And still the things the chamber kept, it kept. There is no entry for the wedding. There was never an entry for the wedding. As for the room itself, and here, listener, the story steps gently across 3 centuries to reach the place where you are lying now. The room is still there. That is the strangest ending of all, and the kindest, so take it with you towards sleep. The palace was emptied by the Revolution, its furniture scattered at auction like any bankrupt's, and then slowly across the last 2 centuries remade, restored, refurnished, curated into the most visited palace on earth. Millions of people a year walk the Hall of Mirrors where you carried baskets at the level of your chest. They shuffle, phones raised through the state apartments, along a prescribed route, over parquet that servants once swept on their knees by candlelight before dawn, and they file into the king's bedchamber and stand. This is true, this is literal, behind the rail. The gilded balustrade, the fence you were told to remember on your first morning, its descendant stands there today, doing today what it did then, holding the world on the far side of it from the bed. The tourists lean at the rail and photograph the crimson and gold and the great impossible bed, and are moved, or bored, or footsore, and drift onto the gift shop, and not 1 in 10,000 of them looks at the little doors in the panelling. The guides do not point them out. The doors to the back rooms, the narrow stairs, the service corridors where the other Versailles lived, where you lived, are shut, unlabelled, professionally invisible, keeping their side of the bargain still. The crowd sees exactly what the machine always intended the crowd to see. 300 years dead, and it works. It still works. You could weep at the faithfulness of it, or laugh, or sleep. Choose sleep, because it is late now, in your century and in this story, and the last duty of this episode, like the last duty of every night the chamber ever worked, is to put out the lights in the right order, and leave you breathing slow in the dark. So let the room empty one more time. Let the machine's roar recede down the corridor of mirrors like weather, one king becoming 200 kings becoming none. Let the fire tick. Let the little white tray be set out by the bed, 3 loaves and 2 bottles under a cloth, the small faithful altar of just in case. For you now, not for him. Every sleeper deserves an onkus against the dark, and yours is this voice, still here, still murmuring, in case you wake hungry in the night. Let the night list of your own day be written out in a careful hand. Everything you carried today, everyone who crossed your corridor, every hour you stood and held, and then let it be read once, kindly, and fed to the fire. Watch it curl and flare and rise. Whatever the day did to you, it is ash now. It was never written. It never happened. That is not a lie. It is mercy, which is what the burning always was. You have stood long enough. That is the truth of you tonight, whoever you are, in whatever corridor your life has posted you. You have stood your watch, weight on both feet, eyes at collar height, holding the world out and the warmth in, and nobody saw the work, and the work held anyway. You did not have to be seen for it to count. The shirt went up warm, the tray was set, the door stayed shut. It is enough. You are enough, invisible enough, faithful enough, tired enough, and tired is not a debt. Tired is a wage, the oldest and honestest wage there is, and you have earned every grain of the sleep that is coming for you now up the back stairs, softly, on feet that know which boards forgive. Centuries will pass. They have passed already. You heard them go by tonight like coaches on a far road. The palace you have been living in will change past recognition and somehow not change at all. The fountains will play for strangers. The mirrors will multiply other faces, millions of them, and forget everyone by morning, as mirrors always did. The great bed will stand empty forever behind its rail, made up fresh for a man 3 centuries asleep. But people will still keep each other's secrets, gently in kitchens and back rooms and hospital corridors, out of love and out of craft. Still warm what a beloved body will touch before it touches. Still sit up in the dark within a bell's reach of someone who might need them. Some things don't change. The keeping doesn't change. Tomorrow there will be the machine again. Yours, whatever it is, wherever your post is. Every life has its lever, its rail, its 100 small ceremonies performed for watchers who see the shirt and never the warming. Tomorrow there will be the corridor and the standing and the errands run at other people's hours. Tomorrow the bells, the lists, the doors, the weight of things carried carefully past people who must not wonder what they are. But that's tomorrow. Tomorrow is on the far side of the dark, a whole night's ride away, and no courier is coming for you, and the drawbridge cot is across the approach, and nothing. Listen to how quiet it is. Nothing requires you now. This hour is the other Versailles, the one behind the panelling. The doors the crowd never notices have closed behind you, all of them, in the right order, and you are in the narrow, warm dark where the body is allowed to be a body, the same as every night that ever fell on that palace, the same as the night after the wedding, the same as the night after the knife, the same as 10,000 ordinary nights nobody recorded because nothing happened, and nothing happening is the softest sentence in any language. Nothing is happening now. Nothing will happen until morning. The night list of the world is being kept by someone else entirely, someone patient and thorough who has done it for years and writes nothing he cannot burn. So let it come now. Let sleep take you the way the dark took the corridors of Versailles, one candle at a time in the right order without hurry, Let the wig and the day come off together. No one can see your bare head here. You're behind the last door now on the inside, where the body is just a body and is allowed to be tired. Let the bells of the chapel sink to the bottom of the night. Let the couriers ride past your gate without stopping. Whatever news they carry, it is not for you, not tonight. Bontemps will read it and burn it, and the morning will know what it needs to know. Let your thoughts loosen like a shift's last knot, slow and soften and finally stop, and the senses can go off duty now, one by one, in the order they were hired that first November morning. The smell last of all, faithful to the end, hot linen fading, beeswax fading, wood smoke thinning to a memory of a memory, the cold well breath of stone corridors sealing itself away behind the last door. The sounds before it, the fire's tick slowing, the far casement giving up its sighing, the palace's beams settling their accounts and falling silent, the small dull bell above your head hanging dead still on its wire, off watch, because nothing will ring tonight. The ache in the arms unclenching, warmth pooling where the weight was, the dark kind now, no longer a mine but a blanket. You held the shirt, you held the corridor, you held the door, held enough, kept enough, done enough. Let the hands open, the fire is banked, the list is ush, the tray is set in case. The old valet on the cot at the foot of the world has heard you settle, and made his last note of the night and put out his candle, and the whole vast house from the attics to the gold is breathing now in one slow rhythm, 10,000 sleepers and you among them, kept, counted, safe, near enough, silent enough, warm enough. What the chamber sees, the chamber keeps. Sleep now. You are seen, and you are kept. Good night.